Chinese President Xi Jinping pledges another $60 billion in support for Africa. And he says the funding comes with no political trade-offs. A closer look at the environmental impact of Kenya's China-built Madaraka rail line and whether it's too late for conservationists to take action. And a new study sounds the alarm on breast cancer rates in Africa. Africa 54 starts right now.
Good evening and welcome. I'm Vincent McCorry. This is Africa 54. Tonight we begin our broadcast with Chinese President Xi Jinping's offer of $60 billion in financing for Africa on Monday and his write-off of some debt for poorer African nations. China has been criticized by some for engaging African nations in debt trap diplomacy, a charge it vehemently denies. While speaking at the opening of a major summit with African leaders, Xi promised development that people on the continent could see and touch, and with no strings attached. Viewers Mariama Diallo reports.
Addressing African leaders in Beijing, Chinese President Xi Jinping said the new package would include $15 billion in aid, along with interest-free and concessional loans and special funds for China-Africa development. And he pushed back on accusations that China was engaging in debt trap diplomacy.
Government debt from China's interest-free loans due by the end of 2018 will be written off for indebted poor African countries, as well as for developing nations in the continent's interior and small island nations.
He says his country is determined to not impose its will, nor interfere in Africa's internal affairs or attach any political strings when offering support to the continent.
China will also expand its imports from Africa, especially for non-resources products, and will facilitate African financial institutions' bond issuance in China.
The package is in addition to an earlier pledge of $60 billion the Chinese president announced at a previous Sino-Africa summit in 2015. Speaking at the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation, South African President Cyril Ramaphosa says the focus is on making tangible improvements to the quality of life for Africans.
In the values that it promotes, in the manner that it operates, and in the impact that it has on African countries, FOCAC refutes the view that a new colonialism is taking hold in Africa, as our detractors would have us believe.
China has loaned about $140 billion to African countries between 2000 and 2017, according to data from Washington's Johns Hopkins University School of Advanced International Studies. Mariama Diallo, VOA News.
Well, for more insights on the second day of the China-Africa Summit, viewers Bill I joins me live via Skype from Beijing. Good evening, Bill.
Good evening.
Now, bring us up to speed on day 2 of the summit activities today. There were some briefings.
That's right. There was a second day of meetings. You know, we had two things going on here at the same time. There was a meeting of entrepreneurs, and then also the 30-some heads of state, representatives from more than 50 countries, really all together here, meeting and discussing the plans for the next 3 years for the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation. We were hoping to get a little bit more detail at the end of the day when there was a press conference held, but really Xi Jinping and South Africa's president, as well as Senegal's president, participated in a brief briefing, but all of them just read their statements. What we were really got from this 2 days of meetings, you've already kind of outlined very clearly. You know, the key thing is that now China has upped the ante even more. They've added another $60 billion that it's willing to contribute to Africa. This time around, we're seeing that some of the loans that it's extending, there's not as many interest-free loans, and they're trying to tailor it a little bit more so that it makes what they're calling a more substantial commitment and contribution to the economies in Africa.
Now, it looks like there are just a few people who tend to see that there could be a trap here, which is being termed as a debt trap. But does any African leader seem to be concerned about this, or everybody's just happy with everything that is being offered and the conditions around it?
Well, certainly all the leaders that came here were very happy about this opportunity. Business representatives and entrepreneurs that we spoke with, of course, were very eager to see what kind of opportunities might come from this. You know, China has pledged that there are no political strings attached to these loans, but really we're going to have to see going forward how this all plays out. You know, one of the key things that has already been mentioned is that wiping off the debt for some of these countries whose interest-free loans come to term at the end of this year. And what we'll need to watch closely is what actually happens. Is there some kind of a give and take with those loans being wiped clean? Does China ask for something in return? We don't know how that's all going to play out.
And while some of these massive infrastructural developments are transforming African countries, some are fearing that African nations are not really owning either. They have no say in how they're being implemented, or perhaps they're just not being kind of involved in how these things are being done. Is there any concern over there?
Well, you know, that's a very interesting thing that you mentioned. Xi Jinping had made one remark where he said that really only Chinese and Africans have a say in whether or not this cooperation is it good or not. And we know that in China there is no discussion about this. The 60 billion that was offered in 2015 and the 60 billion that was now offered up this year. There was no legislative process that brought this forward. This was a decision that the Communist Party leadership made on its own. There has been quite a bit of commentary on China's social media about this. Obviously, these posts, the posts that come up that are critical of the government's decision, are censored heavily and very quickly. But some have noted that, you know, if we had $60 billion to spend on education in China, that could fund the budget for the already cash-strapped ministry for 3 years. Others have said have suggested that maybe we should donate Xi Jinping to Africa and give them his leadership.
Interesting observation.
As this moves forward, we're really going to have to see how both the people in Africa in the different nations there respond and hear how it plays out as well.
Exactly. So we'll wait for day 3 tomorrow. Thanks a lot, Bill, for joining us today. That's viewers Bill Ide reporting via Skype from Beijing in China. Now, conservationists protest the Chinese contractors rushed the building of the railway into Nairobi National Park, home to hundreds of species without adequate environmental studies. Viewers Ndimiake Mwakalia narrates part 2 of our 3-part China-Africa series, the Madaraka Express.
Nearly 4 million people live in Nairobi, the capital of Kenya. Perhaps no big city has such an abundance of nature right at its back door.
This is like what Central Park is to New York.
Trish Hayes has been a Nairobi National Park fan for many years. On the border of one of Africa's fastest growing cities, it is home to endangered rhinos, lions, buffalo, giraffes. More than 400 species. The British first protected the land in the 1940s, and it has remained unspoiled. Until now.
Respect our laws! Respect our animals!
Kenya's government is extending the country's new Chinese-built railway straight through the heart of the park, splitting the cherished preserve in two and igniting a firestorm. Opponents say they were blindsided. Until his death earlier this year, Sidney Kuntai led the coalition fighting the route. He said construction started before most Kenyans understood where the train would go.
In the last 1 year and a half, witnessed a very big threat to the Nairobi National Park.
Critics say that in the rush for jobs, Kenya's government failed to properly study the environmental impact. Lawyer Okia Omtata Okoiti joined conservationists in legal action aiming to halt the extension.
So I got orders stopping phase 2 until we had a few basics in place, like an environmental survey to understand what is the impact of the SGR on the environment.
The Kenya Railways Corporation and Chinese builders declined to answer VOA's questions or agree to interviews about Nairobi National Park. But the Kenya Wildlife Agency did allow VOA to visit the Tsavo National Park in central Kenya to see the SGR's impact there. The railway's first leg, from Nairobi to Mombasa, opened a year ago. It cuts through the 5,000 square mile preserve. A busy highway and older rail line already split the park. The Chinese built 8 high overpasses to allow wildlife in some areas to move freely under the train. Dr. Ben Okita is with Save the Elephants. Okita uses GPS collars to tag elephants and track their movements. His maps show signs that the animals are confused.
There is crossing, but then you can see there's some sections here where the animal tends to be struggling. So as much as they want to cross, they just can't. They just keep pacing.
While scientists studied the impact of Tsavo, Kenyans looked on with alarm as the train cut Nairobi National Park in two. Eventually, the route will extend north to the Ugandan border. Longtime neighbors say the government turned its back on the park's heritage. Kitengela Glass sits at the end of a long dirt road in Olusekron, south of the park. Owner Nani Crows has collected newspaper clippings documenting every twist of the railway construction.
We have so few animals, wild animals, African animals. Where do you find them? In Kenya. This is the treasure of the world. And here we come, and then you sell it to the Chinese for a railway? Bloody hell.
But for Nairobi National Park, it appears there's no turning back.
Well, on Wednesday's Part 3 series finale of the China-Africa Madaraka Express, the Kenyan government promised jobs for locals and compensation for landowners along the route of its new train. With Chinese builders blasting away, some Kenyans are still waiting for those promises to be kept. So be sure to join Africa 54 tomorrow for the China-Africa Madaraka Express wrap-up. Now to a story we've been following. Ugandan police on Monday gave a second opposition lawmaker the green light to travel abroad for medical treatment after he said he had been tortured while in custody. However, according to his lawyer, they also charged him with treason. Francis Zake and 4 other lawmakers, including popular singer Bobi Wine, were detained on August 13th in the northwestern town of Arua. They were accused of throwing stones at the presidential convoy during the campaign for a parliamentary seat. All 5 lawmakers have rejected the accusation. Robert Chagulanyi, better known by his stage name Bobi Wine, arrived in the United States on Saturday to seek medical treatment for what he said was torture by authorities. Zake has also alleged torture at the hands of security forces while in custody. Authorities have rejected those allegations of torture. In a major political development out of the Democratic Republic of Congo, the nation's top court on Monday has definitively excluded opposition leader Jean-Pierre Bemba from December's critical presidential election because of a witness tampering conviction at the International Criminal Court. Now, in a judgment broadcast on national television, the Constitutional Court said the Election Commission had rightly invalidated Bemba's candidacy last month, finding that witness tampering is a form of corruption as stipulated in the electoral law. Bemba, a popular former vice president, was focused as one of the leading candidates to replace outgoing President Joseph Kabila. The December 23rd election is set to usher in Congo's first democratic transition of power after Kabila agreed last month to respect constitutional term limits and step aside in favor of close loyalist Emmanuel Ramazani Shadari's candidacy. Now, they are concerned that Bemba's exclusion from the race could spark a violent reaction by supporters. Now, the carcasses of 87 elephants have been found near the Okavango Delta Wildlife Sanctuary in Botswana. It appears the animals were killed for their tasks, according to a BBC report. Elephants Without Borders, a conservation non-profit organization, discovered the dead elephants while conducting an area survey. The organization claims the incident is the largest scale of poaching deaths ever seen in Africa. Now, the report reveals that poachers tried to hide the massacre by concealing the carcasses with drying bushes. Elephants Without Borders believes the carcasses were poached as the skulls of the elephants were chopped off, presumably to remove the tusks. Botswana has the largest elephant population in the world, and in the midst of its anti-poaching unit being disarmed, poachers have begun to breach its borders. According to data from the Great Elephant Census, 1/3 of elephants in Africa are estimated to have been killed in the last decade. Well, I want to know what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we covered. Join the conversation on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. We're also streaming our show live on Facebook, so check us out and share our show with your friends. Find me on Twitter at viewer Vince McCory. Still ahead on Africa 54, researchers urge action to curb breast cancer rise in Africa. But first, a look at Tuesday's headlines.
African leaders meet for a second day of the China-Africa Forum with a roundtable discussion with the Chinese president. In Mali, President Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta is sworn in for his second term in office following rejection of fraud accusations by the opposition candidate. In Kenya, after the country's tax authority imposed a 16% value-added tax on all petroleum products, many Kenyans are calling for legislators to delay the tax for 2 years. In Ethiopia, the software for Sophia, the first humanoid robot in the world, is partly developed by an artificial intelligence research company in Addis Ababa. Finally, in Egypt, a group of artists called Three Glassy Ladies turned old glass bottles into a new art to decrease pollution and increase awareness of its dangers.
Well, it's time for our health report, and joining us now is Africa 54 health correspondent Lino Mudu with the latest news on life expectancy in Africa. Lino.
The World Health Organization says Africans are now living longer and healthier lives. Healthy life expectancy on the continent rose from 44.4 years at the turn of the century to 53.8 years in 2015. Overall, life expectancy climbed from 50.8 years to 61.2. Death rates from non-communicable diseases have remained steady since 2000, while the other top 10 causes of mortality in Africa have fallen by 40%. Death from diarrheal disease, respiratory infections, and HIV have decreased. But the WHO warns that millions on the continent still face the challenge of chronic diseases and chronic conditions such as cancer and heart disease, and claiming more lives. The WHO says health services in Africa have been slow to adapt to the new health challenges. Now, a study released recently says in the next decade, breast cancer cases could double in Africa if action is not taken. Researchers at the University of Edinburgh in Scotland examined a total of 41 previous studies across 22 African countries. They found that rates of breast cancer are likely to increase in the region amid population growth, unhealthy lifestyles, poor health infrastructure, and lack of education for women. The team suggests that the trend could be halted if data collection and patient registration were improved. Cancer is a leading cause of illness and death among women around the world, and young African women are twice as likely to die from breast cancer than those in high-income countries, according to the study. Now, for more on the impact of cancer in general, I'm joined by Biggs Aloysius Bigirwa, co-founder and managing director of Educate Me Incorporated and co-founder of African Walk for Cancer. After losing his wife to breast cancer, Bigirwa co-founded African Walk for Cancer to raise awareness and mobilize resources needed to improve the lives of cancer patients. Biggs, welcome to Africa 54.
Thank you so much.
So it's really a tragedy. You lost your wife, and that really caught your attention to getting involved in cancer. Tell us more about that.
Yes, so thank you so much again. I was blessed to be living in the United States when my wife of then 1 year was diagnosed with cancer. Actually, it was sarcoma cancer, but it was around the lungs and the breasts. Okay. That's where it was mostly based. Mm-hmm. So I had first-hand experience seeing her being diagnosed and going through chemo and chemotherapy, radiotherapy. She went through surgery, and then she also went through clinical trials. So we did all the options available to cancer patients. Yes. However, because she was diagnosed at stage 4, it was stage 4 cancer, yes, chances were very minimal, if any. Okay. So we did our best. We were able to see the top doctors. And of course, the services here where we live around Washington, D.C., they're so good. So we got the best services. And it was able to, because of the good services, at least she was able to live for the next 18 months. Okay. To see our daughter of 4 months at the time grow into a young, interesting girl.
And as an African, you learned some lessons in that process. Looking back at what is happening on the continent, you mentioned that you were blessed to be here and to have access to good medical care. But what were some of the lessons that you learned in the process?
In the process, I learned that if somebody has good treatment, it gives them a chance at defeating a disease, more so cancer. Mm-hmm. So we thought at some point that she was going to bounce back. She had, her cancer was in remission for about 6 months, when actually we were able even to go camping, go places, yes, because yes, she had been given the best treatment. Yeah. However, mm-hmm, reflecting back on what's happening back home on the continent, whether Uganda, you can talk of Kenya, you can talk of
many countries.
Many countries.
Just,
yeah.
East Africa. Yeah.
Not East Africa, Chad, yeah, where there's nothing at all. Yeah. If it was in such a place, yeah, she would have died right away.
Right away.
Yeah. So I've learned that patients, more so cancer patients, need the best treatment.
And today you are an advocate. What is your focus?
My focus is not only about breast cancer, it's generally all cancers. Yes. And I'm not naive about other non-communicable diseases, yes, like diabetes, hypertension. But I would, from my research and from studies that are easily available, I've found that one of the biggest challenges, like right now on the continent, is cancer. And not everybody is lucky to be in the political or in the economic elites, mm-hmm, to be able to get on a plane and go to India.
For example, yes.
Yeah, for example.
There are many places that
there are places, yeah. There are places, so most of our folks who have money, who have political connections, yeah, are able to go abroad. Yeah. But majority of our people, yeah, including my mother,
it's not accessible to many people. So we're running out of time, but you have a walk coming up. Can you quickly tell us about that?
Yes, so because of this experience, mm-hmm, I decided I have to do something about cancer. And yes, it's because of all the factors we've talked about. Yes. So I have a walk from, it starts in Washington, D.C.
September 8th.
September 8th, mm-hmm, at 10 a.m. Yes. Begins at around Washington, D.C., through Baltimore, through Philadelphia, up to New York City. Okay. We're supposed to be finishing around September 28th.
And what do you hope to accomplish?
To raise resources, to raise equipment, to raise awareness, most importantly, because I believe that when somebody says has a voice and puts up across a word, there might be somebody, maybe it might be a leader, a political leader, maybe those who have been blessed to be in political positions.
Yes.
Maybe it's those who have money. I understand that Africa has some folks, some people who have money, who have power, who can use those resources to help the continent. We don't have anybody to blame for our own problems, because when we die, it's us who die. So I believe that by having my voice out, I might inspire somebody to do something. But I personally, I believe I will do something with the resources that I will be able to raise.
Thank you so much, Biggs, and good luck on the walk.
Oh, thank you so much for having me here.
And that was Biggs Aloysius Bregewa. He is co-founder of African Walk for Cancer. And that's our health report for today. To stay in touch, find me on Twitter @LenorMoudou. Back to you, Vincent.
Well, thanks a lot, Lenora. Be sure to watch Lenore Moudou's health reports every Tuesday and Thursday right here on Africa 54. Welcome back to Africa 54, and here's what's trending. Taking out the trash in Australia is a booming business. This factory in Western Sydney will receive 250,000 tons of mixed industrial construction and demolition waste each year. Previously, it would have all gone into landfills. The trash is picked clean of reusable materials like metal and timber. By the end of the process, the waste will be turned into fuel, burnt in cement kilns in Australia and shipped overseas. The plant will produce enough fuel to replace 100,000 tons of coal a year. That's the equivalent of cutting the greenhouse gas emissions of about 20,000 cars. Well, and finally, what if 20 years from now, robots walked the streets alongside humans, doing many of the same jobs that we did today? Now, Ethiopian developer Gagnet Assefa is working to turn that sci-fi dream into reality. Assefa is a scientist and co-founder of ICOG Labs in AI research space in Addis Ababa. ICOG was part of a team of scientists that developed the software for Sophia, the world's first humanoid robot. Sophia has even learned some Amharic, the developers say. Designed with high cheekbones and a slender nose, the robot, who is also a citizen of Saudi Arabia, can display 60 types of facial expressions and carry a conversation. And that's what's trending today. Well, and that's our show for today. Thanks a lot. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. For more news, tune in to VOA's evening radio show Africa News Tonight at 1800 UTC, and in the mornings to Daybreak Africa between 0300 and 0600 UTC, Monday through Friday. Thanks for watching. From all of us in Washington, have a good night.
Welcome to English in a Minute. This expression sounds like a violent way of eating, but it's actually not always about eating.
Here is your Russian book, Anna. Thanks for letting me borrow it.
Oh, are you done with level 1 already?
Yeah, I finished last week, and I've already finished level 2.
Wow, you are really sinking your teeth into learning Russian.
Well,